My brother John, the middle sibling, was a mild Republican. My younger sister Dorothy stood to the left of me. My father was pained by his daughter's liberal leanings. He had assumed I would marry a Republican banker, settle down in Pasadena, and lead a conventional life. But if I'd done that, I'd probably have turned into an alcoholic, as a number of my friends had. Instead, I had married Paul Child, a painter, photographer, poet, and mid-level diplomat, who had taken me to live in dirty, dreaded France. I couldn't have been happier. Reading about Truman's election victory, I imagined the doom and gloom around Pasadena. It must have seemed like the end of life as Big John knew it. Eh bien, tant pis, as we Parisians like to say. Now we fast forward to August 15th, 1949. What's that, 7.5 months later? Almost 8 months later. On August 15th, 1949, I turned 37 years old. Paul bought me La Russe Gastronomique, a wonder book of 1,087 pages of sheer cookery and foodery, with thousands of drawings, 16 color plates, all sorts of definitions, recipes, information, stories, and gastronomical know-how. I devoured its pages. By now I knew that French food was it for me. I couldn't get over how absolutely delicious it was. Yet my friends, both French and American, considered me some kind of a nut. Cooking was far from being a middle-class hobby, and they did not understand how I could possibly enjoy doing all the shopping and the cooking and the serving by myself. Well, I did, and Paul encouraged me to ignore them and to pursue my passion. I had been cooking in earnest at ReadAloud, which is the nickname they gave their apartment, but something was missing. It was no longer enough for me to salivate over recipes in La Russe Gastronomique, or chat with the neighbor, or sample my way through the menus of wonderful restaurants. I wanted to roll up my sleeves and dive into French cuisine. But how? Out of curiosity, I dropped by l'École du Cordon Bleu, Paris's famous cooking school. There, professional chefs taught traditional French cooking to serious students from all over the world. After attending a demonstration one afternoon, I was hooked. The next class began in October. I signed myself up for a 6-week intensive course, smacked my lips in anticipation, and waited for the great day. And as an historian, one of the things I love about this book, she must have kept a diary. Her precision with dates and times is fabulous. So here we go. Her first cooking lesson. At 9 a.m. on Tuesday, October 4, 1949, I arrived at the École du Cordon Bleu, feeling weak in the knees, snozzling from a cold. It was then that I discovered that I'd signed up for a year-long année scolaire instead of a 6-week intensive course. The année cost $450, which was a serious commitment. It would be something like $5,000 today. But after much discussion, Paul and I agreed that the course was essential to my well-being and that I'd plunge ahead with it. My first cooking class was held in a sunny kitchen on the building's top floor. My classmates were an English girl and a French girl of about my age. There's a 50s bit. Everyone following that? I'll say it again. An English girl and an American girl of about my age. She's a girl at 37. Neither of whom had done any cooking at all. To my great surprise, I discovered that many French women didn't know how to cook any better than I did. Quite a lot of them had no interest in the subject whatsoever, though most were expert at eating in restaurants. This housewife course was so elementary that after 2 days I knew it wasn't what I had in mind at all. I sat down with Madame Elizabeth Brassard, the school's short, thin, rather disagreeable owner, parentheses, she had taken over from Martha Distel, who had run the school for 50 years, close quotes, and explained that I'd had a more rigorous program in mind. We discussed my level of cooking knowledge, her classes on haute cuisine, which was high-end professional cooking, and moyenne cuisine, middle brown cooking. She made it quite clear that she didn't like me or any Americans. Quote, "They can't cook," she said, as if I weren't sitting right in front of her. In any event, Madame Brassard decreed that I was not advanced enough for haute cuisine, a 6-week course for experts, but that I'd be suitable for the year-long professional restaurateurs course, that I conveniently had just begun. This class was taught by Chef Max Bugnard, a practicing professional with years of experience. We, I said, without a moment's hesitation. It turned out that the restaurateurs class was made up of 11 former GIs, that's American GIs, who were studying cooking under the auspices of the GI Bill of Rights. I never knew if Madame Brassard had placed me with them as a form of hazing, or merely because she was trying to squeeze out a few more dollars. But when I walked into the classroom, the GIs made me feel as if I had invaded their boys' club. Luckily, I had spent most of the war in male-dominated environments, and wasn't fazed by them in the least. The 11 GIs were very GI indeed, like genre movie types. Nice, earnest, tough, basic men. Most of them had worked as army cooks during the war, or at hot dog stands in the States, or they had fathers who were bakers and butchers. They seemed serious about learning to cook, but in a trade school kind of way. They were full of entrepreneurial ideas about setting up golf driving ranges with restaurants attached, or roadhouses, or some kind of private trade in a nice spot back home. After a few days in the kitchen together, we became a jolly crew, though in my cold-eyed view there wasn't an artist in the bunch. And in contrast to the housewife's sun-splashed classroom upstairs, the restaurateurs class met in Cordon Bleu's basement. The kitchen was medium-sized and equipped with 2 long cutting tables, 3 stoves with 4 burners each, 6 small electric ovens at one end, and an icebox at the other end. With 12 pupils and a teacher, it was hot and crowded down there. The saving grace was our professor, Chef Bugnard. What a gem! Medium small and plump, with thick, round-framed glasses and a walrus-like mustache, Bugnard was in his late 70s. He had been dans le métier, in the field, most of his life, starting as a boy at his family's restaurant in the countryside. He had done stages at various good restaurants in Paris, worked in the galleys of transatlantic steamers, and refined his technique under the great Escoffier in London for 3 years. Before the Second World War, he owned a restaurant, Le Petit Vatel in Brussels. The war cost him Le Petit Vatel, but he had been recruited to Cordon Bleu by Madame Brassard, and obviously loved his role as Eminence Grise there. And who wouldn't? The job allowed him to keep regular hours and spend his days teaching students who relished his every word and gesture. Despite being overstretched, Bugnard was infinitely kind, a natural if understated showman, and he was tireless in his explanations. He drilled us in his careful standards of doing everything, quote, the right way. He broke down the steps of a recipe and made them simple. And there's another key sentence for the historian. I'll read it again. He broke down the steps of a recipe and made them simple. And that's what she did in Mastering the Art of French Cooking for American readers. She decoded French recipes. So, but for this person, one suspects there would also have been no Julia Child as we know her. And he did so with a quiet authority, insisting that we thoroughly analyze texture and flavor. But how does it taste, Madame Child? One morning he asked, who will make the œufs brouillés today? The GIs were silent, so I volunteered. They teach you in the Army never volunteer for anything, right? She wasn't in the Army. So I volunteered for scrambled egg duty. Bugnard watched intently as I whipped some eggs and cream into a froth, got the frying pan very hot, and slipped in a pat of butter, which hissed and browned in the pan. Non, he said in horror before I could pour the egg mixture into the pan. That is absolutely wrong. The GI's eyes went wide. With a smile, Chef Bugnard cracked 2 eggs and added a dash of salt and pepper. Like this, he said gently, blending the yolks and whites together with a fork. Not too much. He smeared the bottom and the sides of a frying pan with butter, then gently poured the eggs in. Keeping the heat low, he stared intently at the pan. Nothing happened. After a long 3 minutes, the eggs began to thicken into a custard. Stirring rapidly with the fork, sliding the pan on and off the burner, Bugnard gently pulled the egg curds together. Keep them a little bit loose. This is very important, he instructed. Now, the cream or butter, he said, looking at me with raised eyebrows. This will stop the cooking, you see? I nodded, and he turned the scrambled eggs out onto a plate, sprinkled a bit of parsley around, and said, voila. His eggs were always perfect, and although he must have made this dish several thousand times, he always took great pride and pleasure in this performance. Bougnard insisted that one pay attention, learn the correct technique, and that one enjoy one's cooking. Yes, Madame Shield, fun, he would say, joy. It was a remarkable lesson. No dish, not even the humble scrambled eggs, was too much for him. You never forget a beautiful thing that you have made, he said. Even after you eat it, it stays with you always. So that's a pretty good teacher if you're going to learn how to cook. The one other thing I'd like to say extemporaneously about Paul Child is that not only did he encourage her to do the book, but when they approached her to do television in 1963, and this is when she entered my life, because she was on in the late 60s when I was a little kid, she was, shall we say, not a natural for television. She's a shy person and so on. So he, by virtue of having done work in public relations and exhibits, was basically the producer of the show. And the first time they taped the pilot, I guess you'd call it in Hollywood, the first episode, she just did her work as though the camera wasn't there. And the response from the TV folks was, this can't go on the air. And so he coached her in how to be sufficiently theatrical and dramatic to make her a success on TV. And so it's a very 50s story. They were married for over half a century. In other words, they got married, they stayed married. It was a very positive combination. And actually, I don't seem to have anything else marked, so I'll turn it over to you. Let's just trade shares.